right, here we go. All right, we are probably live. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, we are live. Let's see. Get everything set up right here. Hmm. Okay. Hopefully everybody will see us side by side now. All right, we've got a few people joining in. Give me a few minutes to share it here. Lawrence, while I'm doing this, why don't you say hello? You haven't been on Facebook in quite some time. So, how's the puppy? How's the wife? And how's work going?
Uh,
Not necessarily in that order.
the wife is fine. Both she and I are teaching online via Zoom. We're hoping that things go back to normal. At least that is, we're hoping that we'll be teaching again back in the classroom in the fall. Classes at OSU are going to continue online through the summertime, but hopefully normal classes start again in the fall. And the puppy is about 6.5 months old now, and she's pretty hyper right now. I could hear her running around. Usually, right at dusk, she goes through this hyper period and then just flounces and takes a nap. So she's full of energy. I wish I had her energy. As for me, just constantly busy. I always have papers in the works, and I have a paper due in about a week um, for an Israeli journal on issues having to do with politics and religion, and a volume for Cambridge University Press that I'm working on, and quite a few papers that I'm supposed to be reviewing, and I'm supposed to be editing a symposium for a journal, and so forth. Constant work.
Sounds like you're busy. So, how's the teaching on doing the school online working?
It works great, I think, for me. I teach upper division and graduate courses in philosophy. And, if I have, for instance, my graduate seminar, I have 4 people in it, and the few people sitting in, people from other parts of the world, in fact, scholars from England and so on, who are sitting in for my seminar. So the fact that it's online creates that opportunity for other people to join in.
Great.
And,
Okay.
discussion is not diminished by it being online. So, you know, works great.
Are you guys using Zoom?
We're using Zoom, and Zoom
Now,
has a few features that Blue Jeans doesn't.
but I've heard this also has some flaws. I've heard there's been some trouble with it lately.
Well, the amount of use, I'm sure there's been some problems. I think there's been some security issues, but the security issues are all manageable. Basically, every meeting can be password protected. It's just a matter of people doing it. So I think that some of the flaws are just really just people not knowing how to run their own security on their, like you've heard about these congressional meetings where they never put in a password or made the password publicly available, and then people would Zoom bomb or whatever they were calling it.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's what I heard was about the Zoom bomb.
yeah, the screen sharing on Zoom is much better than Blue Jeans. That's the one big upside to it. That with Blue Jeans, I can give you like a static image of a screen. So I can't, for instance, like type things into a word processor and you see it typing. At least if there is a way, I don't know how to do it after all this
Right.
time. I don't know. I don't think we can do it on Blue Jeans. There's a whiteboard, but not, I can't just like have you look at my Word document or my Excel document. But with Zoom, all those features are there that you can see live changes in any window.
I've also noticed that the Blue Jeans only shows you 9 people plus yourself at a time. So while it'll hold up to 75, you can't see all 75 of them at the same time. And it kind of floats in and out depending on who's talking as to which ones you see.
Yeah, well, that's not a problem with Zoom. My largest class, like I said, I only teach upper division and graduate courses. My largest class this semester only has like 14 people in it. I can see them all at once.
All right, well, let's get started. Lawrence, we wanted to come on and talk about a whole bunch of stuff. We'll start with what the governor said. We all heard the governor had made a comment about recreational cannabis in Oklahoma
Mhm.
and had implied that there really wasn't any more new money there. So let's start with that, what you think about what the governor said, and let's break into whether or not there would be any new money in that. We're going to talk, for everybody else out there, we're going to talk about a whole lot of issues, okay? But this is just what we're going to start with. This is just this one. So, Lawrence, what do you think about what the governor said? And let's take a real look at those numbers.
So, with the drop in oil prices and with the drop in revenues because of the virus, we're looking at something in the order of $1 billion shortfall. And some of that's going to be made up through the rainy day fund. Who knows whether there'll be any cuts? But, there's a huge, huge budgetary hole we're looking at. And so Representative Fettgetter, in part through, our encouragement towards this idea, has sort of floated the idea of moving towards a recreational program to help fill in that budgetary shortfall. And so my understanding is that Governor Stitt's response was that what we have already is tantamount to recreational, and so there really isn't any more money to be gained. So these are the two issues that we could explore, and let's just start out with the money issue. Um, I just took a quick glance, and my impression is that the current program is basically such that it's going to bring in something in the ballpark of 30 to 50 million dollars in excise tax revenue. That's a 7% tax. So basically, the prediction is about 30 to 50 million dollars. I think last year it was in that range. Um, and that's based upon sales of somewhere in the order of $250 million worth of cannabis.
Now, wait, let me interrupt for a second. Is not that sales tax collection from the excise tax is 7%? That's not even half of the taxes that's been collected on it. That's been what's been collected to first pay for the program and then go to what it was designated for through 788, right?
Well, here's one way to put it that I don't know what the cost is of managing the OMMA, but if we pulled in 30 to 50 million dollars in excise tax, then that would have to pay for the program. That tax plus all the money that comes in from licensing would have to pay for the whole OMMA administration. And then after that, it gets designated into education and so on. So it's already allocated money. And
Okay,
part of
so
what
the
represents
well, so the general sales tax that is collected along with that is in excess of that same number.
That's right. So, right, there's general sales tax. What is that at the state level? It's 4.5%, and then various towns and counties and so forth have an additional amount above it.
It
It
ends
just
up
depends on the
between
county.
8 and 10%.
Yeah. So that those sales tax revenues, of course, are going to wherever they're going, allocated to the state general fund, allocated to the localities where the cannabis was purchased. But we're just talking about the excise tax right now, which is in the ballpark of 30 to 50 million dollars. And of course, it's hard to know exactly because as the program ebbs and flows, as more patients get on board and so forth, that number could change. But 30 to 50 million dollars, let's say. And in Colorado, last year they brought in approximately $300 million dollars in excise tax. So close to 10 times the amount, 7 to 10 times the amount of what we're looking at in tax revenue. So,
Okay.
a state level recreational program versus our program. Like there's lots of, it's not exactly apples to apples. Colorado's a bigger state. It's geographically somewhat different than Oklahoma and so on. But nevertheless, if you were to compare the revenue that we get from the excise tax here to the revenue that we get from that Colorado gets from its excise tax, they're bringing in 7 to 10 times more in excise tax than Oklahoma is. So if we had a program that was like Colorado's, basically if we didn't have a patient card and anybody could walk into a store, anyone over the age of 21 could walk into a store and purchase cannabis, then it's just not realistic to think that we would be at roughly the same revenue levels that we are now. So, where do the differences come in? The difference, like Colorado has something in the order of 80,000 patient licensees, whereas we are around 250,000 patient licensees.
Okay, so hold on. So for that argument, I don't mean to interrupt you, but hang on a second. So let's assume for this, because we've had this argument a bunch, and everybody lands in a different spot. We have to first agree that we cannot call it all medical for this conversation, okay? So if you're watching and you want to say it's all medical, stop talking about rec. For the sake of the law, the taxes, what we're talking about for this conversation, we have to have a defining point. Now, in doing that, I would say that what I think will happen is I see what Governor Stitt is saying in the sense that we've already got so many card holders. How many more users could we have? Well, the reality is a great share of the users, of the card holders now, would be perfectly served in a recreational market and would be quite happy with that. I don't think that everybody would renew their card, and I think that would slowly shift some of the sales. Some would say you're tanking the medical market, but no, you're bringing it down to those that are really patients. But
there's just so many, so much complexity in all of this. And, one thing to say is that in Colorado, once again, let's say there's about 80,000 patients, whereas there's potentially a couple million people each year purchasing cannabis. And so, can we say that all use is medical? Well, imagine you're 17 years old and you're using cannabis for the first time and you're sitting around with a bunch of guys smoking your first joint ever and giggling. I don't know if I think of that as medical. Or likewise, you get home from a hard day at work and you just want to relax in front of the TV set and you smoke a joint and you're relaxing. You can be drinking a scotch, right? And so relaxation as such, I'm not sure whether that's sufficient to call it medical. I think that we have a sliding scale of what counts as medical. Arguably, all use is medical in the sense that there may be a benefit to ongoing cannabis use in terms of it helping with your immune system, in terms of it helping with inflammatory matters that most people have some level of inflammation. So helping with your metabolism, reducing issues having to do with diabetes. So there's lots of sort of baseline benefits that cannabis can offer to a person, just in the same way like taking a vitamin pill, right, has those benefits. But you have that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have people that just use it occasionally to relax. And that kind of occasional use to relax, I don't see how it's different from alcohol. And so it just doesn't strike me as a canonically medical. When I think about medical use, I'm thinking about people with Crohn's disease, with fibromyalgia, with multiple sclerosis, people who have, serious medical ailments that studies have shown that this benefits. Like, that doesn't mean that that's all the medical use out there, but that there's, when we want to make the argument that there's a medical benefit to cannabis and we want to push for social change, the arguments that we used in the state to get 788 passed had a lot to do with things like fighting the opioid crisis, right? Knowing that cannabis can be used to relieve neuropathic pain, for instance. Those are the kind of essential medical uses that I think of as the focus, and that's the focus of the medical programs in most other states. So
how would with what Stitt said, how is he wrong in the sense that even before you say the word out of state, as far as out of state customers, would you see the same thing as me, that the program would slowly shift? While there might not be a great number of in-state recreational sales right away, it would slowly increase, and then the medical use would become more of what we might consider medical use?
So here's my guess, that most not all people, most people who like to use cannabis on a regular basis have a card, right? Most of the people who will be buying the larger amounts of cannabis already have a card. Not everybody, right? Some people are still buying through the black market or getting a card holder to buy for them and so on. But still, I would think that a very large number of Oklahoma residents who use cannabis on a regular basis have a card. But there's a lot of non-regular use. And some of these people might still be getting a little bit from their friends who do have a card. But I've been in dispensaries where people just walk in off the street wanting to buy cannabis and only then find out that they need a card and have to leave. And these are people who just, they might have used it back when they were in college or whatever and want to try it again. People who just are not regular users and are not going to go to a doctor and spend the money for that and spend the $100 to get the card and so forth and go through all those hoops just so that they can buy, an eighth every couple months. So, even though they're not buying as much, there's a significant number of them, right? There's NIDA studies, National Institute of Drug Abuse studies on the frequency of use in each state. And there's about 2 times more people in the state that are occasional users than are regular users. So, if you look at the NIDA data and you compare it to the patient base, there's a significant number of people. We're talking about something in the order of 500,000 roughly people in the state who don't have cards that, based on NIDA data, use cannabis on an occasional basis. And
so that would be your black market. Some of that would be your black market.
Right, black market, or, they have a friend who has a card and they buy from that friend.
That's black market. That is black market. Right.
So that still means that the revenue is going to the state, right? If we're talking about those kinds of sales. And so people might buy 50 or 100% more than what they would use for themselves and, sell it off to their friends or whatever it is. And so in that, there may not be a lot of additional revenue. But then there's a lot of scenarios, like one of the ones that I think of is between where I live and my nearest dispensary is a nursing home. And it's a pretty large, senior living facility with, various levels of assistance. And probably very, very few, if any of them, have patient cards. Yet, if you were to say, here's an ointment, here's something that you can use, it's not going to get you high, but it'll relieve your arthritis, they would very much probably be interested in trying it, but they're not going to go and get a card just to try it. And they can't go into a dispensary and buy it without that card. So when I ask where the market might come from, that would be beyond existing sales. There's a lot of people who aren't currently buying, who might buy. People just haven't tried it since they were in college, saying, hey, let's just go in. It's not like they have a friend who has a card, or it's not like they're going to embarrassingly ask a friend. But, there's people who just want to give it a shot. And if the card wasn't there, if the card wasn't a requirement, if anybody could just walk into the store and buy cannabis like they can go to a liquor store and buy cannabis, or go to the pharmacy and buy ibuprofen, if anybody could do it, that increases the number of people who are using it, that increases the number of people who gain the benefit. And the more people that use cannabis, the lower the stigma goes, right? So, beyond the economics of it, the more widespread the use is, the less of a stigma there is. But it's all that population that would be willing to try it if they didn't go through the hoops. And once again, NIDA data shows that there's about 500,000 people who don't have cards who are at least occasional users. And then there's arguably another 1 million or 2 million beyond that who'd say, all right, let's find out. So the idea that there's no more revenue to be gained from Oklahoma residents, I think, is just extremely implausible. 22% of Coloradans use cannabis.
Okay, so all right. Since you've just brought Colorado, since everything the new business you've talked about right now, or the new money that you've talked about in addressing what Governor Stitt said, that you've talked about so far, has been all within our borders.
Right.
So now let's talk about, yes, we're not the size of Colorado. We're not Colorado, okay? We don't have the same skiing and everything else. But let's talk about that cross-border sales.
We have the second most populous state in the nation along our border. 30 million people live in Texas, and we are closer to Texans, most Texans. Oklahoma is closer to most Texans than Colorado is. And its largest city, I think Dallas is its largest city. its largest or next to largest city, I think Dallas is the largest city, right, is within an hour's drive at that from the Oklahoma border, and 2.5 hours from Oklahoma City. So, Arkansas has a restrictive medical marijuana program. I know that there was plans to put recreational on their ballot for 2020. I don't know if it's going to happen. Missouri has a restrictive medical marijuana program. There were plans to put recreational on their ballot for 2020. I don't know if that's going to happen. Kansas has an extremely restrictive medical marijuana program. That's not much more than a CBD program. And so, we have, and then, New Mexico has a fairly open medical program. But, what we have is surrounding us. We have 40 to 50 million people. 40 to 50 million people that could come to Oklahoma to purchase cannabis. And so before we talk about violating federal laws and anything, my point is that already Colorado is doing this, right? Colorado has $3 billion in cannabis sales per year by virtue of cannabis tourism for the most part.
Right. Yeah, they can all stay, for this conversation at least, we can assume it's all staying in the state. So they're going to be in our hotels, in our restaurants, in our gas stations. They're going to be spending money throughout the economy.
Yeah, that's right. So, in addition to the hypothetically $3 billion in cannabis sales, tenfold increase in cannabis sales that's possible if we were to have a rec program. In addition to that tenfold increase in sales and revenues from cannabis alone, we would also have, all the tax money that would come in from people eating at restaurants, staying at hotels, buying gas here, and so on and so forth. And so where would these people come from? Well, Dallas is, clearly, right, a major, right, financial source. And so the idea that we won't generate any further revenue, I understand ideologically people might say we don't want to encourage, any kind of interstate activity related to cannabis. I understand that. That's a point that people could discuss. But economically speaking, I think that it's very reasonable for us to anticipate $200 to $300 million in tax revenues within a year of going rec.
Let's talk a little further about that. Some that might disagree or be very concerned about this cross border. Once you say anything about out of state, be it customers coming in or whatever, they go into a bit of a panic. As you said, Colorado's already doing it. The way I see it, if we don't do it now or as soon as we can, if we don't do it first in this part of the country, Texas will eventually catch up. Kansas will eventually catch up. Arkansas will eventually fix their program and not give any of these people a reason to ever travel to Oklahoma. Right. So we will have missed out on that, and we'll still do it at that point. We'll just be late, so we won't get the out-of-state money.
And of course, it's not just Colorado, right? It's Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, Alaska, Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, I think Vermont, Maine, and I'm missing a couple. I think there's 12 states now that have full access, right? And every single one of those states are gaining tax revenue by people coming in from the border states to purchase. And where are we? Texas, right? Where do the people of Texas go? What border state, right? What do they border on? Where they have full access. Same thing, Kansas, westernmost Kansas can go to Colorado, but the rest of it not. Arkansas, Missouri, and most of Texas. Most of Kansas, most of Texas, most of Arkansas, most of Missouri, they all, in theory, would come here. Just like people from surrounding states of Massachusetts go to Massachusetts. And people from surrounding states of Colorado go to Colorado. That's the way it's become across this country. Across the country, right? That people are traveling into a state to purchase the cannabis that's legal there, that's not legal in their state. And so if we were to do this, it won't fill up $1 billion gap, but it might cover 20% of it. And right, if the resistance is we don't want a recreational program, well, Governor Stitt has already acknowledged from his perspective, from the perspective of our lawmakers, perspective of our employers, the perspective of our doctors, perspective of basically all the power structures in our state, we already have a recreational program. We have what is, from their perspective, basically a recreational program, but there's a card, right? And you could be you could be 21 years old. You could be 21 years old with not one health problem that you're aware of at all, and go to a doctor and get one of those cards.
Oh, 18.
Right?
18.
18? 18.
Yeah.
Then you could be 18. You could be 18, right, in the prime of your life without one health issue, and you can get that card. And so when we call this a medical program, is it just a medical program in name only? There's two ways in which I see what we have as a medical program. Number one, in name only, it's a medical program. You got to get a physician card in order to be physician recommendation, in order to get the card, in order to gain the access. But anybody can get that physician recommendation. Anybody can get the card, irrespective of any medical issue whatsoever, right? So it's just nominal. The other way in which it's medical is the much more legitimate one, which is that we have a program in which there are about 250,000 participants, and at least some of those participants have multiple sclerosis, are dealing with cancer, have fibromyalgia, have Crohn's disease, have Parkinson's disease, have seizure disorders, and so on and so forth, and are gaining substantial medical benefit. And whether or not we call this a recreational program or whether or not we call it a medical program, it doesn't matter. Because certainly in Colorado, there are people who don't have a medical card who are using it medically. So what's the point of having the card, right? If you're going to spend over $1,000 a year, given the economics of it, if you're going to spend over $1,000 a year in buying cannabis, it's in your financial interest to have a card, given what the expected taxation rate would be for rec. Break down the numbers, the cost of seeing a doctor, the cost of getting the card, processing the card, and so forth. Roughly, it's about $1,000 a year. If you were to spend $1,000 a year on cannabis, then it's in your financial interest to have a card. If you don't spend $1,000 a year on cannabis, it'll be in your financial interest to pay, say, a 15% tax rate rather than a 7% tax rate. It's about the breaking point is about $1,000. So if we did the following, if we basically said, take the existing program, get rid of the physician requirement, just simply take the program exactly as it is, and simply say, no longer do you need the physician requirement, no longer do you need the card. If you have the card, you pay less in tax. If you don't have the card, you pay more in tax. And if you want to pay less in tax, well, then you get the card renewed. If we, a simple act of legislation could do that. And if we did that, then within a matter of, it may or may not be in as an emergency clause, but as soon as it becomes in effect, we're going to have people streaming into the state, staying in our hotels, eating at our restaurants, buying our gas, buying our food, benefiting from the Oklahoma economy, the Oklahoma economy benefiting from them, for them to have access to something that the people of the state already have access to. So,
something I've noticed is in my lifetime of being in Oklahoma since '79, every time the economy tanks, we have to wait for all the other states around us to recover and get vacation money before they spend it on gas and oil prices go up enough to where we cover our basics again, where we stop hearing about how the budget isn't sheared up again and we're in trouble. This could be, I think, a partial solution for that. Not a simple pill, but a partial solution. And look, let's address something here, Lawrence. We're not telling everybody here what has to happen. What Lawrence and I are trying to do here is start a conversation with you guys. And what we will encourage you guys to do is to come into this Blue Jeans app and to talk to us about this. Tell us where you think we're wrong. Tell us what you think. We don't know everything by far, but we do think that the cannabis movement needs to move forward, and we want to find a way to do that together. Lawrence, let's address that and what we've been talking about.
So Let me sort of put it this way. I'm going to personalize it. I am a professor at Oklahoma State University. I am the director of religious studies at Oklahoma State University. I have no financial interest whatsoever in anything related to cannabis. I got involved in this, little more than 2 years ago, working for the Yes on 788 movement. I was one of the official organizers for the Yes on 788 campaign. And so I spent many, many months doing everything that I could to help get 788 passed. And after that, I got contacted by the state legislature and by the Department of Health and so forth to help set up policy, to help craft some law and so on. And why did I do all this? I'm not a person that uses cannabis. Why did I do all this? Well, part of it is because I hope to be able to find something related to cannabis for my own medical needs. But the fundamental reason is that my entire life I've thought that the war on drugs is just an abomination. My entire life, and I remember having conversations way back with people arguing that the war on drugs is pretty much the worst public policy America has ever had since slavery. And I've just deeply, deeply held that is fundamentally wrong. So, as soon as I became aware, which was basically in late 2017, became aware of State Question 788, I wanted to get involved because of that principled commitment. And so what I see, what I see we've done in Oklahoma and what we still need to do in those terms. What I see here is what we need to do is we need to expand access because everybody who has a medical need and everybody who wants to be able to use it should have access to it. And we don't realize, a lot of people don't realize that they don't. And we could talk more about that. But there are tens of thousands of people that are still not able to access cannabis in this state. So my own attitude is what my goals are as an activist, expanding access, addressing and overcoming the stigma of use. It's a plant. It's a God-given plant that's been used by humanity for over 10,000 years. We should love it and respect it, and the world should understand its great value. Overcoming the stigma. Number 3, ending federal prohibition, because it's not just about me, and it's not just about Oklahoma, but there's tens of millions of people still suffering in this state, in this country. There's nearly 100 million people in this country who still can't access cannabis, and they matter. And the fact that it's federally legal, think about the economic costs, right? Your 580E costs. Think about the economic cost to every single business because it's federally illegal. Think about the stigma. Think about all the other damage related to the fact that it's federally illegal. So we as activists ought to be striving to end federal prohibition. And then lastly, I sort of think that what is really essential to all of this also is always speaking the truth, because the fact that the movement has gotten as far as it is because of the truth of cannabis. And so, Chris and I have been sort of rolling around in our heads certain ideas as to sort of what does it really mean to be a cannabis activist? People can have disagreements. Of course, we can have disagreements about timeline, about priorities, about strategies. All that's good and fine. And, we need that because we need a healthy conversation. But what does it really mean if you are committed, right, as an activist? I think these are the core principles. It's about expanding access. It's about ending the stigma. It is about ending federal prohibition, and it's about speaking the truth. So, when we talk about where do we go from here, where does this state go from here? 788 is one way or another not the end. Eventually, federal law will change. It might change in 2021. It might change in 2024. Eventually, federal law will change. And when federal law changes, the system's going to be radically different. And we might go, like the 12 other states that have rec programs, into a rec program before federal law changes. And so what does the rec program offer? It offers more access. It, in theory, and it's debatable, and there's ups and downs and complexities, but it could address the issue of stigma. More people that use it, the less stigma there's going to be. And if people just diminish 788, if legislators and the governor and so forth think about this existing program as nothing but rec, what we do is we say, okay, well, let's have a rec program and let's have a medical program, and let's have a medical program that you're going to acknowledge as a medical program. And so we can overcome stigma by getting all those people who dismiss what we have as not medical, by creating a program that they're willing to acknowledge as medical as well, while at the same time having access for everybody. All
Right,
right?
yeah. By bringing in a rec program before any tweaks to any medical program, we avoid taking the joint out of anybody's mouth, and everybody still gets access. And
So,
that is what's supposed to be about, access. I mean, look, I think that I've said this a bit in this Blue Jeans app, and again, I want to tell everybody, I encourage you to come in there. I can tell you there's about a dozen of us in there almost every night. Almost every time I'm in there, I start some argument about something. It's fun, okay? Sometimes we yell at each other. I'm usually the first one to raise my voice, but these people are friends of mine at the end of the conversation because we're all just passionate about how we feel. An example, James Fields and I disagree on, Lawrence, something we've talked about in a rec bill. We think counties should be able to opt out. Well, James doesn't think they should have that. Perfectly disagreeable thing. James and I have yelled at each other about that. We're friends at the end of the day. So if you don't agree with us, don't just come in here and yell at us. Come in here and tell me. Come in here and say whatever you want to say, as long as you're willing to also listen to what I have to say and understand that if we are all activists and if we do all believe these core principles and we need to figure out what those are, then at the end of the day, when we're done yelling, we've got to agree on something so that we can move forward.
who's the real enemy here, right? Who's the real enemy to the cannabis activist? If you are a cannabis activist, who's your enemy? Your enemy is the person who thinks that cannabis is a bad thing and wants to keep it illegal. Your enemy is the person who wants to diminish access. Your enemy is the person who stigmatizes it, right? Your enemy is the person who basically is the reefer madness figure. And they're still abundant. So, the internal debate within the community is needed and healthy. But, let's understand that if your commitment is to expanding access, if that's presumably, I think, I would take to be essential being an activist, then we don't have all the access that we could have. We don't have as much access to cannabis here in this state that people in other states have. We're not as far ahead as other states.
So do you think perhaps that some perhaps have used some fear tactics to turn people away from the idea of expanding the program? Or let me ask you something that I know some people are going to ask as soon as this is over. If we expand this access all of a sudden, are we going to have a supply problem?
Yeah, so, we've probably seen that in other states. The day that cannabis becomes available, there's lines around dispensaries, and the inventory for medical patients gets squeezed. So, imagine the following. Let's say November 1st, let's say we pass it in the legislature, and November 1st, 2020, it becomes legally available, and people are driving up from Dallas and driving down from Kansas and so forth, staying in our hotels and lined up to buy Oklahoma cannabis, all right? So, we'll have a squeeze. We'll have a squeeze. But then people will know that it's coming. You'll know November 1st. It gets legal, and people presumably from other states will be coming in. So what do you do if you're a medical patient? You buy a little extra in advance. And how long does that squeeze last? That squeeze might last a couple weeks. So, there'll be a big weekend. There'll be a big couple weekends. And then it dies down. Not completely, right? But it doesn't become an overwhelming. And then also supply comes back up to meet demand. So I'm sure there'll be a squeeze, but, it's something that people can prepare for in advance. And it shouldn't be what should stop us from this, right? Because we would be talking about something that's pretty darn temporary and something that we could all prepare for in advance. And then that period, we have a much greater amount available for sale. The economics of scale will make the products cheaper for patients. So one of my thoughts is that how much is a gram in Colorado? It's like $3. Or in Oregon, $3. If you have a large enough supply, if you have a rec program, right, then the base price of the product goes down. Yeah, if you don't have a card, taxes go up. Well, what are you going to do? What would you rather do? Pay 7% on a $10 product or pay 15% on a $3 product? So the economics are such that I just don't see having a rec program as economically hurting people. You would have the option of getting a card, paying lower taxes, but even if you don't take the card, if you're spending not a lot of money on cannabis anyhow and you pay the higher taxes, you'll, in time, right, prices go down. And as for the squeeze, it's like a couple week squeeze should not be the basis for saying no to, expanding access.
And not to mention that if everybody sees it coming, the producers are going to, just increase what they produce. The growers are going to increase what they grow. Everybody's going to shear up to get ready to make more money because they are in business to make money.
Yep.
So, I think that's a very short-term thing. And I'd also like to say that I believe after a number of private conversations at the Capitol with different lawmakers, I do believe that, and Lawrence, you've had these also, that after we bring in a recreational program and those finances start to shift, like we've talked about, that we'll be able to get the taxes dropped or lowered and eventually dropped on the patients when they're offset by recreational, as well as eventually even the cards paid for. And then what would it be? Let's see. You go to your doctor. He says, hey, cannabis might help you. Here, go try it. And all you have to do is go through the process. You don't have to put out all that money because just like if you wrote your prescription for, you don't have to get a permit to buy your opioids. You shouldn't have to get a permit to buy your cannabis, in my opinion. But
yeah, well, my other thought, again, just from my perspective as an advocate, is I just see cannabis use as a fundamental right we have, and we shouldn't have to get a government license to exercise a fundamental right. We think about that attitude when it comes to gun ownership, that we shouldn't get required to have a permit to own a gun. Why should we get a permit to use cannabis? I just don't see why people are comfortable with this.
And if we're going to have a permit, we're calling it that, a permit for certain doctors to allow you to use it, shouldn't that be free and tax exempt, or at least cheaper?
Yeah.
The tax is cheaper.
So you could say, what's the point? What's the point even of having a medical program if we have a rec program? What do we even need a medical program for? Well, I think that we could say that people with long-standing medical needs, right, that have to rely upon cannabis, it would be fair to give them that tax relief. And so just like you go to your doctor to get a handicap placard or whatever, right, your doctor says, okay, you have problems walking, I'll give you, right, I'll sign the form so you can get a handicap placard so you can get the handicap spot. So likewise, the doctor says, well, you have fibromyalgia, you rely upon cannabis, let me sign this form so you can get that tax relief. There's a lot of other arguments too, and we can get into it, but one of the things that really just gnaws at me every day is that there's at least 50,000 people in the state of Oklahoma in pain management that cannot use cannabis. Their pain management doctors won't let them use cannabis. And it's not because those doctors oppose cannabis. It's not because they think that cannabis is bad. Many of them, and I've had many meetings on these points, they support cannabis use, but they want to be able to approach it like medicine. They want to be able to say, in your case, this is how much I think is right for you, and this is how much I don't think is right for you, and have some say in the matter. And so they want to be able to shape their patients' use of that cannabis. And part of the reason, one of the main reasons, is really honestly liability. So that if they could document that these are the restrictions that they have placed, then they have a kind of liability protection. Because then, I won't go into the details. I've had lots of arguments, but that's really the crux of it.
Yeah, I want to follow that up with saying that while you've told me exactly what the doctors want, and I know you've had these conversations, and of course, first thing I said was no way. But you know what? That's a starting point, meaning they can want those things. We'll go have another meeting with them, and we'll find somewhere in the middle that we can all agree on. I believe we can do that.
And so my rationale, again, is always this: access. We don't want to diminish anyone's access, so we don't want to make any of these things a requirement. But on the other hand, for people who are in pain management, whose doctors prescribe them opioids, people in oncology, people in psychiatry, whose doctors say, if I'm going to give you a scheduled medication, then I'm not going to let you use cannabis unless I could have a say, unless I could basically regulate your use. It's for those people, tens of thousands of people in this state with serious medical needs. A lot of people voted for 788 as a way to respond to the opioid crisis. Well, how are we responding to the opioid crisis if we don't have a way to get people who are dependent upon opioids off those? And so I just feel like we're stuck in a situation that I didn't expect. I had conversations with doctors that were ready to accept the use of cannabis when 788 got passed, and then they got scared off of it by lawyers telling them about the liabilities. And so I understand what could be a way to get those doctors to allow their patients to use cannabis. And so if you're going to be an advocate for cannabis use, the goal is to find a way to get people who need it, get them that access.
Yeah, and
So,
I would ask everybody to please understand that that particular group that Lawrence is talking about, that is by far the group that he and I put foremost, first, and important in this program, and they're not being served. They're not getting access. We've got to do something about that. And as he said, without taking the joint out of anybody's hand. So how do we do that? Bring in another program or something.
opioids can kill you, right? 70,000 people per year die, right, from opioid overdoses. Some of those are prescriptions, some of those aren't. Opioids can kill you. But here's another thing, right? Long-term opioid use causes Alzheimer's. There's a strong correlation between long-term opioid use and Alzheimer's because opioids will cause an inflammatory cycle in the brain, which results in amyloid protein deposits, which is the basis for getting Alzheimer's. Well, guess what cannabis does? It prevents that inflammatory process. It breaks up those amyloid proteins. So cannabis can stop the damage to the brain that opioids cause. And so when I think about what the medical needs are out there for cannabis use, I can't but say that that's the priority, saving people's lives. Cannabis is a respiratory stimulant. Opioids are a respiratory depressant. If somebody were to use cannabis with opioids, it could offset the depressant effect of those opioids and save their life, never mind just allowing them to use less opioids. And so when I think about the medical program and when I think about medical use, that I just see as the crucially most important medical need we have that's not being served. And I want to find a way to fix that.
Well, it's going to take all of us, that's for sure. I want to ask again that you guys start coming into this app or start your own. Write down what all you think needs to be done and send it to us. You see how Lawrence feels about this. You guys know I feel the same way about it. We're going to keep pushing. We're not going to stop. So I'm just asking that you guys help us so we can get it right.
And
Lawrence,
that's the thing. Let me just emphasize that.
Go ahead.
Help us so we can get it right. Right? Our goal is not to do it, in secret. Right? We didn't have anything, basically we were tossed 806 and 807, right, by other people. And so it wasn't ideal, but that's what was on the table. And if we want to do it right, for 2021, let's get started. Let's start getting that conversation working now so that we don't actually, with these knee-jerk reactionary moves, start doing things that just don't pan out in the future. Maybe we can get a legislature to do it in 2021. Or maybe we have to do a citizen petition in 2021. But we can do it by working together with, in a timely fashion, as opposed to something in haste, right? That is the result of communal infighting.
Yeah, first we've got to come up with a list of what we have to get done. and then we can figure out, because that's a very complicated question. I love having that one about whether we do it through the legislator or whether we do it through initiative petition. That is a real argument to be had, and I think it's a matter of we have to ask ourselves, what all must we get? And something we haven't even touched on here, which is as important as anything that we've said, is getting these people out of jail that are in jail for what we're now making legal. Though I know some of you may notice we haven't addressed that, but don't think for a second that isn't important to us. As far as I'm concerned, they're right up there side by side. That was one of the things I did like about 807, was that it had both in there.
I like the idea of giving us constitutional protection to be able to possess cannabis, to buy cannabis, to sell cannabis, to grow cannabis, to gift cannabis.
Yeah,
I like the idea of that as a constitutional protection.
And in that, right there, to grow cannabis, that is one of my biggest concerns about whether we go through, and we'll answer this, we'll take this off into blue jeans later, but I want to throw it out there. Whether we go into a state statute through the legislator or a constitutional amendment through initiative petition, that home grow, as it stands right now, guys, you got to understand, it's not enshrined in the Constitution. We have zero real protections. They could come in and shut down the program. They're not going to, but I'm just saying it's not in the Constitution. So my concern is everybody being able to grow. For me, that is about, as we've talked about, a key principle of moving forward as an activist. I feel like everybody needs to be able to have that same right to grow. What do you think?
Let me add this, that in the state of Utah, they had a citizen initiative that passed. And then as soon as it passed, their state legislature nixed it and replaced it with something much more austere. Why did that not happen in Oklahoma? Because of Representative John Eccles, right? Because we had one man, right, in particular, who was in a position, right, to support this movement. If we had somebody other than Representative Eccles as floor leader who would have let those kinds of bills move forward, we would not be where we are today. And so when we think about whether or not this program is going to go away, how much longer does Representative Eccles have, right, as floor leader? And who might replace him? If federal law doesn't change, when Representative Eccles times out and somebody comes in, that person could be anti-cannabis. And then it all is gone.
I can tell you that Representative Eccles and I have had many conversations about that exact concern. He is as concerned about that as we are, as to what happens when he's gone. Do we stand a chance? Because, you know, I've said this before, and Representative Fettgetter has said this multiple times in public, that the cannabis industry is the smallest when it comes to campaign donations, and we don't even have a full-time paid lobbyist. It's me for free and Norma and Lawrence, and you know, that's all at the Capitol.
A few others, I'm sure, but still. Yeah.
Well, but we don't have, we're not big tobacco. We're not big insurance. We're not schools. We're not even vaccine moms. Those guys have 10 times more pull than we have. And I tell you what, that the lady who runs that, I wish I could spend the week with her learning how she does it. She can get 10,000 people down there if she wanted to. That's a protest. I mean, that's how you get it done. So I'm worried about what happens after Eccles leaves. I've been saying quietly with some of them, we need to find a new white knight, somebody new that just got in that maybe wants to ride this for the next 10 years or so.
One of the things that really bothered me with 806 and 807, the one that really was, the issue in 806 and 807 that bothered me the most was that even though I supported the idea of sort of the core elements as constitutional, I would have wanted a sunset clause. I wanted basically, once federal law changes, that we could sunset any provisions that are more restrictive than federal law. So if we do move forward with the citizen petition, if we do move forward with the citizen petition as opposed to the legislature, then a way to do it constitutionally is to enshrine in the Constitution our protections, but then design them in such a way that any of those protections that are less than what federal law would allow move up to what federal law allows. Something along those lines. So if we protect our right to have an ounce or whatever it is, then that, that particular qualification changes as federal law changes.
I want to say when we sent that message to Representative Fettgetter and started this conversation about possible recreational this year, it was right. It was on this app. It was with someone else in the room that just happened to be in because it was just open and we were all here doing what we do. And I didn't think about all the way through, or I would have thought, wait, what about the home grow? Because I am concerned. And I know I was speaking with Representative Fettgetter yesterday, and we don't know where this is at right now. When he gets next week with the governor and all of them are arguing over the budget, this might just be what somebody pulls out of their back pocket. The idea of a rec bill through the legislator. My concern is that they only and solely design it to make money, and it doesn't move the movement forward, but just secures their wallet, or not their wallet, but the wallet of the budget is what I mean. And I'm concerned about it having anything done, whether they do it this year, we do it with them next year, or we do it next year petition, that it have these core principles that help move this movement forward through the rest of the country. So I guess our starting point, Lawrence, needs to be, as you mentioned, we've got to figure out what these core principles are. We don't have all the answers. We've got to get these people, the ones you guys watching us, to come tell us what you think the core principles of an activist, of a cannabis activist, should be. And let's see if we can get some consensus, and maybe we can come up with an umbrella that we can all get under, and then we can move forward once we're all under that umbrella together.
Right.
And
so,
go ahead.
So my first pitch, and let's just see what other people do with this, but my first pitch is expanding access, getting rid of the stigma, ending federal prohibition, and speaking the truth. And so, right, if we were to think about sort of the umbrella principles of what it is to be a cannabis activist, that's what comes to my mind. That's sort of my initial offering to all of you. I want to see what other people think and what ideas they have. That's sort of where the conversation could start.
All right. Well, we've been going about an hour, so So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, I want to ask everyone to please download the Blue Jeans app and join the room and tell us what you think, okay? It's open almost all day, every day. If it's ever not open, just send me a message and I'll open it up. You don't have to get in there and argue with me about it. I'm not in the room all the time. I'm actually not in there that much. But there's always 2 or 3 people in there having conversations, sometimes looking for something to talk about. This should be the topic, I feel, going into the summer, because clearly what happened at the end of the summer, or beginning of this year, has been a disaster, and we've got to avoid that. We've got to avoid that, and I'm willing to work with anybody to make that happen. But I'm not willing to stop, okay? Just understand that. I'm not willing to stop or go away. It's not going to happen. We're not going to stop. We have core principles we believe in. Our lives are dedicated to those things. We're asking you to join us, and let us join you, and let's all join each other, and let's move this forward together.
We should be an alliance of people committed to core principles of activism. We could disagree, but we ought to be all understanding that our goals are about, hopefully, access, overcoming stigma, ending federal prohibition, speaking the truth, something along those lines.
That's a really good starting point. I like that. Okay, folks. Lawrence, you have anything else before we wrap it up?
Bear in mind what Governor Stitt said. I think that he's way off base. I think he's way off base about the benefits of moving forward in this state. I think that the benefits to the people of the state, both in terms of having access to cannabis, addressing medical needs, and the financial side are profound. And this crisis is one that could allow us to move forward swiftly, and I think we need it. We should have it.
Okay. All right, folks. Lawrence, you stay right there. Folks, we're not going to go anywhere. I think Lawrence might need to here shortly, but I'm going to unlock the room, and I'm going to stay in here, and please come have a conversation with me, okay? Tell me what you think. I'll listen. Just as I said, understand that I will also speak. And let's understand that when we're done, we have to both agree on something, whether it's leans towards what you said or leans toward what I said. We have to agree on something because we have to move forward. And if we just keep throwing up these roadblocks, these hills to die on, there should always be some hills to die on, but they should be mountains, not hills. So there we go. That's it. Mountains to die on, okay? I can get behind any mountain to die on. I'm tired of seeing the cannabis movement in Oklahoma at a standstill because we have hills we're dying on. Let's
Hills,
only
not
do
even
that
hills.
with the mountains.
Not
What's
even,
that?
not even hills. Not even.
Not even hills, yeah, speed bumps. All right, folks, that's it for now. Again, I'm going to unlock the room in a minute, and I will post the link. Most of you know it. It's on my page. It's probably right below this post, so it should be real easy to find. All right, folks, that's it for now. Until later, stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road.
Bye.